The 400, 800, 1200 XL, XE, no one ever seemed sure what to call these machines. The Atari 8-bit family is the clumsy name for them all. Not the biggest selling system anywhere, this mostly intercompatible range of computers still left a fairly big mark on the world of gaming. Once again, I'm going to go wading through the retro effluent to dredge up a net full of games that really pushed the limits and showed what these machines could do. And well, there's only one place we can start. It's got to be Star Raiders. On their release in 1979, the original 400 and 800 machines were easily the most graphically powerful home systems you could buy, and Star Raiders was the killer app. A showcase for what they could boast over their, by this point, many competitors. A game that actually turned out to be one of the most important in video game history, even if no one seems to remember it much today, a pioneer. How so? Well, let me count the ways. Number 1, it's 3D first-person perspective with 2 different viewpoints and total freedom of movement. Coming along even before Atari's own Battlezone, this may well be a first in commercial gaming, beaten to the punch only by experimental stuff being passed around the computer labs of the day. Number 2, it's an open world game, or at least an early prototype of that sort of thing. There is no linear structure here, no levels, no set path. You are free to move around the galaxy at will. In fact, it becomes an essential part of the game's strategic element, leaving it up to the player to decide whether to attack or defend. Number 3, it's got a narrative. Okay, not a massively strong one by today's standards, but this is more than just bump on the back of the box. It's a story that you play a part in, which leads us to point 4. It's beatable. Yes, there is an end to this game. Unlike even many later games, there is a way to win. Numerical score has been dispensed with completely, maybe the first action game to do this, replacing it with a performance rating, not unlike Elite from a few years later. There is quite a lot about this game that will be familiar to fans of Elite, from the star map and hyperspace to the 3D combat. This was in fact an acknowledged influence on the now legendary space trading saga. Of course, with early games like this you can always point to examples that do it better, and compared to what's coming up later, this looks nowhere near as impressive on the surface at least. But, well, I think it did push the limits, not just of the old school Atari 8-bitters, but of games in general. Crammed into an 8KB cartridge and coming just a year after Space Invaders, it was a big leap forward. Where to next? Well, I think it's got to be Wayout from 1982. Yes, this game's greatest feature is obvious from the start, 3D graphics once again. I want to call this Wolfenstein style raycasting, but well, I'm fairly sure that it's not. It is though quite possibly the first example of filled 3D polygonal graphics ever seen in a game, complete with 360-degree freedom of movement. Yes, the viewing area is small, but the frame rate is high, and despite being the first, this is some of the best 3D you'd see on a home system for years to come. As a game, well, although it may look like a first-person shooter, the actual lack of shooting precludes it from being that. Much more like the ZX81's 3D monster maze in gameplay. It's not massively deep, escape the maze whilst avoiding the fearsome map-stealing kleptangle is the basic thrust. Pilfering Euclidean geometry is never going to be quite as scary as prehistoric monsters, but still it plays pretty well, and is more than just a tech demo. There's only one thing that's going to top this in 3D performance though, that is this game's direct sequel from a year later, Capture the Flag. Created by the same programmer, this goes even further into the third dimension. We lose a bit of frame rate maybe, but we gain a much larger playing area and split screen 2-player action. Capture the Flag? Well, that name captures exactly what this is about. Either against another human or against the CPU. Once again, almost, but not quite, a first-person shooter, giving us a surprisingly early preview of what was going to be big in the next decade. In fact, taken together, these two games seem uncannily prescient, like some kind of out-of-place digital artifact. In the hyper-compressed progress of the gaming world, well, this is a bit like finding a pair of Air Jordans in a medieval midden. Why did this not cause more of a stir at the time? Why does no one remember these games? Well, I've no idea. Definitely, these two are long overdue for being given their due. We can do no better than this though. Surely there can be no greater surprises in the Californian computery fun sack, can there? Well, hang on to your codpieces, because here's a trailblazer if ever there was one. It's Mercenary. Yes, okay, this appeared on a lot of platforms, but the Atari was the original, and at least in the 8-bit world, maybe the best too. Ambition and innovation is what's striking about this. It's got it sloshing all over the place. A 3D first-person open-world game crammed into such a machine is pretty breathtaking. You wouldn't think it was possible, and well, it feels like it only just is. Yes, it requires the massive 48K of RAM that the later machines came equipped with, but still hardly a resource hog. There's a whole city to explore, spaceships to fly, cars to drive, and lots of fairly obscure puzzles to solve. A primitive, low-spec version of the modern immersive sim, a taste of what Fallout and Bioshock would give us in the years to come. Of course, it's all very blocky, textureless wireframe stuff, but it moves surprisingly well, a pretty solid frame rate throughout. You might spend much of the time wondering where the hell you are and what's going on. Like a lot of games of this vintage, half the battle seems to be working out exactly what it is you're supposed to do. It is, though, still pretty forgiving. You can't actually die, and if you do get hopelessly stuck somewhere in the massive game world, you can warp back to the city at any time, though you do lose your items in the process. This is a game that really wants to encourage exploration and experimentation, a truly non-linear open-world experience. Escape from Targ is the subtitle, and that's exactly the aim of the game. Get off planet Targ, but how you do that is largely up to you, offering the sort of freedom that very few games had done up to this point. Yes, it bears comparison to Elite once again. Elite, released the year before, blew open the doors of what was possible in a game, and Mercenary seems like it set out to do the same thing, but on a terrestrial rather than a galactic scale. Another title that deserves more recognition than it seems to get. It's arguably just as groundbreaking as Elite, and in some ways maybe more relevant to the path that gaming eventually took. A lot of the biggest games from the past 15 years or so do look an awful lot like more sophisticated versions of this, a remarkable legacy. Moving on, released in 1985, the same year as Mercenary, there's another huge innovator we need to look at. Alternate reality, The City. Treating us to a colourful, cinematic and maybe slightly overblown opening, complete with its own song, it's got more of that common theme on the Atari 8-bit, ambition. True to RPG form, the first thing to do is create your character, then it's time to dive right into the vast and strange world of the city. A massive game that left all its contemporaries behind when it comes to baffling complexity. Now, first off, the graphics here are definitely worth talking about right away. I want to call this raycasting once again, but this time I would certainly be right, because that's exactly what it is. In fact, probably the very first time this was ever used in a video game. Admittedly, the end result isn't all that much different from the purely bitmap pseudo 3D of the Bard's Tale. It doesn't allow for full rotation or anything like that, but it does look pretty good for an 8-bit game from 1985. The rain effect is certainly notable, crude but effective, and I'm struggling to think of an earlier game that even attempted something like this. Now, I've got to say that I have a fairly high tolerance for challenging 8-bit games. I'm sure my videography will prove that, but well, this one left me feeling a little frustrated. Throwing you right in at the deep end with no weapons, little money and very limited resources, this game is tough to get into, to say the very least. I'm not sure what you're supposed to do other than wander around town punching blind beggars to death until you get enough cash for a decent weapon. I could well be missing something, maybe seasoned players could fill me in, but it seems like an aggressive learning curve you'll be faced with. The direct sequel, Alternate Reality, The Dungeon, is slightly more accessible, but not a whole lot. Moving underground to the dank pits favoured by more conventional RPGs, it does seem a tad more focused, but still not easy to get into. How can you fail to escape from mould? Many game overs will be the fate of anyone who plays either of these two games, each one accompanied by another song, just what you need to soothe your tortured soul in the face of defeat and a very long bout of loading. Yes, I resorted to some fairly serious cheating to try and get further into this, but well, this pushed even my ZX Spectrum hardened patience to the edge. But well, I am getting off the point here. In either guise, Alternate Reality is a flawed experience in many ways, but it undoubtedly pushes the limits of this system pretty hard. Enormous worlds, deep and complex systems, tons of content for anyone with the persistence to get that far. Like Mercenary, these two titles were a window into the future of gaming. Ridiculously detailed, the amount of stuff you can do here is incredible. Your characters can even get scurvy if they don't eat enough fruit. It would take another 20 or 30 years before this kind of world building would really come good with the likes of the Elder Scrolls, an amazing attempt on a system that finds its origin in the 70s. Now though, we're running into a bit of a problem. In 1985, the best years and best games of many 8-bit systems were still to come. The NES had barely got into its stride. The Atari 8-bit line, on the other hand, seemed to be withering on the vine, with releases slowing to a trickle as the decade wore on. The system missing out on most of the major multi-platform releases and enjoying scant few notable exclusives. A real shame. This multicoloured pixel pioneer had a lot of untapped potential, as this more modern scene demo shows. It should have enjoyed the same continued success as the Speccy or the C64, but it never did, at least in the commercial arena. It does though continue to have a very large following on the demo scene and in the homebrew world, so it seems fitting that I should round this list off with a couple of more modern releases, new tricks for the old dog, which show what might have been. And first up, it's Space Harrier. Yes, an unofficial conversion of Sega's super-scaling arcade rail shooter. One that appeared on, well, darn near every platform bar this one back in the 80s. Originally released in 2012, this modern retro conversion is a minor masterpiece of 8-bit porting. Better in so many ways than it really has any right to be on a machine of this vintage. Okay, the colour palette is a little strange, but other than that it seems to have it all. A surprising amount of detail and a decent turn of speed make this a winner, a good bit ahead of all those other 8-bit home computer ports from way back when. Of course, programmer Chris Hutt had the advantage of a whole load of modern development tools, but this is still darned impressive. More of this sort of thing back in the late 80s would probably have given those Atari systems a boost they really deserved. These machines were, in most respects, well in advance of anything the Spectrum could offer, and could pull off tricks that even the C64 and NES would struggle to emulate, thanks to its clever graphics hardware and large colour palette. With that in mind, there's only one place this could end. It has to be Atariblast. Now, the old Octo-bit Brotherhood was sadly left wanting when it came to 2D shooters, missing out on so many of the big names. No Atari equivalent of Manfred Trenz ever turned up, at least back in the day. Here though, coder Paul Lay does his best to make up for this deficit by creating a game that is basically every darn 80s shooter all mushed up into one, and somehow it works. Yes, this is a game that's rather, well, liberal with its inspirations, making no attempt to hide what it's riffing on, but for a non-commercial release like this, I think we can forgive that. Everything this game does is undeniably impressive, proving that Atari's weird wedges had very compelling 2D capabilities, even if they were never fully exploited back in the golden age of 8-bit gaming. Masses of sprites swirling across huge colourful backgrounds, smooth scrolling, even some parallax effects. We may never have seen ports of R-Type or Salamander or really any of those big arcade shooters, but this surely proves that this hardware could have come up with the goods if anyone had bothered. It's even got a fairly catchy in-game soundtrack, a surprisingly uncommon feature on this platform given the capabilities of the onboard Pokey sound chip. This game looks so wonderful it might be a bit too good to be true. Doesn't this require some special modern upgrade add-on or something? Well, actually no. Although Atariblast does use a huge 1MB cartridge, it doesn't require any special hardware on top of that, and will consequently run on all but the earliest of the line, those limits pushed without cheating. The best looking game on the old Sunnyvale Smasher? I think it could be. Finally something that gives it a good workout. And now this is the point where I'm going to call time on the adventure. You know, even with Atariblast on the table, I still think there is some excess capacity left here. With graphics hardware designed by J Miner, this was the baby Amiga, capable of oh so much when pushed hard. Demo sceners keep showing us just what heights this 70s survivor can be pushed to, and the eye-popping tricks that it can do never seem to end. Are there more surprises in store on the 8-bit family? Well, I hope so. As always, do let me know what you think I've missed, new or old. So with that, it's time to say thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.